So then really, then you have the seeds for the sort of heart of the book, which is really looking at the kind of main pillars of folk rock, which is Pentangle and Fairport Convention, Sandy Denny, Nick Drake, John Martin, incredible string band, you know, these figures that kind of, you know, for me sort of took the idea of folk and took it in all sorts of interesting directions, really musically. You know, I'm not saying they're sort of the apotheosis of what folk music can and should be, but I'm more kind of writing about the moment that I think, you know, in British music is very dynamic, and you know, a lot of the ideas that I've already talked about sort of, you know, the landscape and nature and nostalgia and progress, electricity, acoustic, you know, all these things, all these tensions really kind of come out in the music of the late 60s and into the 70s. And really, you know, the bulk of the book is kind of telling the stories of these groups and these artists, and, you know, looking at the different ways they interpreted the idea of folk. I mean, I was interested, you know, before it, you know, I wasn't quite sure, you know, you have an album like Liege and Leaf by Fairport Convention, you know, which has partly settings of ballads and partly songs that were written by members of the band. You know, and I wasn't sure if at the time that was seen as something outrageous and a betrayal, Judas-like, you know, or if it was seen as, you know, something that sat comfortably in the tradition, if you like. And I wanted to kind of come to some kind of understanding of questions like that. And you know, what I think interesting now, I mean, I've actually just been talking to somebody who's been making a film about folk music and ideas about tradition and you know, what's happened to the idea of tradition in a way. And, you know, I was saying, you know, I think my conclusion in writing this book is really to be much more comfortable with the idea that, you know, tradition and the idea of authenticity is a bit of a false, you know, false grail in a way, because, you know, when you look at the way folk music has come down to us, you know, the way it's travelled through time, as I said at the beginning, you know, it's quite random in some ways. You know, the canon that we have, whether published in Cecil Sharp's books or the child ballads or whatever, you know, the way these things were collected and assembled was fairly scattershot, you know, but nevertheless they are the kind of, you know, base documents that we have. The you know, people singing these songs were also very often just singing half-remembered stuff that probably they heard their, you know, grandparents or their great-grandparents singing, you know, a lot of the lyrics also, you know, the stuff that you see written down in printed folk songs, you know, the sort of foldy-rolly-roll type stuff, that's very often just people singing to a collector and, you know, not remembering the words, so they're just kind of filling in, you know, but that's kind of come down to be something that represents folk music. You know, so I think, you know, for me, I saw the whole electrification of folk and the whole kind of transplantation of the music through these different incarnations, through the classical music, through the industrial sort of acoustic revival, through various aspects of folk rock, you know, even into stuff that's happening now, and there's all sorts of strange and wonderful music going on now that pulls on ideas of folk or the landscape or these kind of things. You know, to me they're sort of equally valid in a way, because that really is what the folk process is and does. You know, it is about transformation. And it's not, I don't think it should be about preservation of things, because, you know, I think that, you know, if you have, if you think about a stream, you know, the bits that aren't moving are the stagnant bits, you know, you kind of, to stay fresh, or a well, you know, a well is stagnant if you don't use it. If you start using it and drawing water from the well, it brings new water into it and keeps it fresh, and I think that's what revivals do, you know, that they kind of keep folk music and keep the tradition fresh.